Welcome back, my dear listener, to another Learn Your Own Rules, the podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Krim, and this is a board game podcast about board games. COVID-19 continues to sweep across the country. Political upheaval is in the air, what with the elections being the other day. But at least we have board games to keep us safe and warm at night. Or am I the only one that uses boards as blankets? Yes, that's correct. Like I said, this is a board gaming podcast about board games. Today, we're going to be following my normal routine. We're going to talk about some games I've played recently. Then, we're going to move on to our game of the week, which this week is Obsession. As a quick reminder, for those of you who aren't familiar with this podcast, we do not go in depth into rules here. I will maybe discuss rules very, very quickly or give a short summary for context. But if you'd like to know more about the way a game is played before listening to my comments on it, I will be placing some links in the description of this video or this podcast that go to great content creators who make videos specifically for teaching the rules for a board game. So if at any point you find yourself confused and you'd like to have some more context, please feel free to check out those links. Or if you're looking to learn to play a game, definitely check out those links. These guys and gals are great at what they do, and they're certainly much better at that aspect of talking about board games than I am. So, without further ado, let's continue on. This has been a slow week for board games. Like I said, coronavirus is causing all sorts of problems, especially out here on the West Coast. So, we didn't get to meet with our groups like I would have preferred in a non pandemic situation. Fortunately, my home situation is such that I can still play games, just not as many, or sometimes the ones that I want. But I still have plenty to talk about besides that. Our Gloomhaven campaign is continuing on. This is a game designed by Isaac Childress and is published by Cephalofair Games. It needs probably no introduction. It's the big smash hit of 2000 and something teen. I'm a great journalist. I have been enjoying Gloomhaven quite a bit, and I really understand the praise that it's gotten since its release. All of the stuff it does well, it does really, really well. It's kind of like the movie Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim, at its core, is a really stupid movie. But the stuff that it gets right is the stuff it needed to get right, so it's so much fun to watch. Giant robots fighting big monsters. What more could you ask for? Yeah, it's cheesy. Yeah, the plotline doesn't necessarily make sense, and it's not necessarily got great character development in it, but it's still fun to watch because it does what it needs to do well. It does it perfectly. And Gloomhaven reminds me of that. It has its downsides, it has things I don't like about it, but those things are definitely not deal breakers because the game is just as good as it is. Everything's got its rough edges. And by rough edges, I mean things like the writing, for instance. The writing is frequently abysmal in Gloomhaven. It's hard to read out loud because it's horribly clunky and it's really not compelling at all. And that plays right into the fact that the kind of overarching story is completely forgettable. Forgettable to the point where we've played many missions now, and I'm not even quite sure which storyline the main story is supposed to be. That could be partially on us because we like doing side quests and things like that. But that's okay. This is a game that rewards you for doing a whole bunch of different stuff and isn't really about keeping track of what's going on in the greater scheme of things with Gloomhaven and with the Necromancer and all this other stuff. Character progression was something that was at first something I didn't really like about Gloomhaven, and my complaints about character progression still stand to an extent. It's not as in-depth, it's not as dynamic as something like Arkham Horror, which I prefer. Arkham Horror, the card game. At first, I really didn't like the character progression in Gloomhaven very much. But then I retired my first character and realized I just didn't like the character progression of the character I was playing. I was playing the Tinker. It's not really a spoiler because it's one of the first classes that you get. It's right there in the first page of the rulebook. And the upgrade options that I was seeing just were not the kind of playstyle I was really interested in. The first class that I unlocked, I picked up and immediately was more interested in what was going on. I try to not peek ahead at cards that are coming because I like to be surprised, but I couldn't help myself for a couple of these and I got really excited. Our party also unlocked the enhancement feature, which is a rule that is buried in the rulebook towards the back of the campaign section. The game tells you to unlock the enhancement feature at a certain point in the campaign, but doesn't say that anything else happens in the campaign book. So, a clue to all you people out there, make sure you've read the rulebook from back to front, and when you unlock the power of enhancement, check the rulebook for rules about that, because it's pretty cool, and you might miss it for like 4 or 5 missions like we did. So while the character progression in Gloomhaven is not as robust as it is in Arkham Horror, I am still finding myself very much enjoying it. The theme is really cool. I like that it's a strange fantasy world. It's not just the default Tolkien-esque high fantasy concept. But really the thing that made Gloomhaven as popular as it is and makes it sing the way it does is the standard playing mechanics. Gloomhaven does away with the standard attack and move and attack formula that you see in games like Descent, and it creates a very interesting puzzle for every turn, trying to maximize your cards, similar-esque to Mage Knight, and it makes the inherent play-by-play gameplay so interesting that it doesn't surprise me at all that the game got as popular as it did. So I look forward to playing more Gloomhaven. I look forward to unlocking more things in Gloomhaven. That's the joy of legacy games after all. And yeah, I played that recently. And that is Gloomhaven, designed by Isaac Childress and published by Cephalofair Games. We had a chance to play Barkham Horror recently. This is a standalone scenario for Arkham Horror, the living card game, designed by Matthew Newman and published by Fantasy Flight Games. Now, I don't normally care for standalone scenarios in Arkham Horror, the card game, at least not insofar as when they're played as legitimately standalone scenarios. I love inserting them into the middle of a campaign. It can make for funny stories, like when we were on the trail of the cultists and then randomly decided to take a trip to Paris to take part in the big festival. But when you play a standalone scenario by itself, you essentially create a deck that's played for just one mission and you play it and then you're done. You don't have that really enjoyable character development that I really like. You don't really get much of a narrative element because it's just kind of one mission. So I wasn't expecting to really like Barkham Horror, but it was cute. It was very tongue in cheek. It felt like it took the appropriate amount of time to play. That can be a detriment to some of the standalone scenarios. Guardians of the Abyss, for example, is forever long. It's like 3 to 4 hours long with 3 to 4 players, and there's 2 parts to it. But Barkham Horror was relatively quick. It was maybe a little too easy, but there were a lot of great references to other stuff from the Arkham Horror card game. The mechanics were cute. There was a treachery card that you had to bat one of your assets off the table like a cat would, and then it's broken for the rest of the game. So that's cool. It had a really cute twist at the end that I'm not going to talk about because that would be a spoiler. It was fun. It wasn't as fun as maybe doing the next mission in a campaign and getting new cool cards, but I enjoyed playing it and I'm glad I got a chance to. Unfortunately, it's not something that I can recommend, I don't think. I recently found out that it's not going to be reprinted um, for whatever reason. To be honest, though, I wouldn't get too bent out of shape about it. While it was cute and it was fun to try, it doesn't have any lasting impact on a campaign. And in most cases, I think you're probably better off picking up a different scenario pack anyway, because you can play those as part of a campaign, gain experience, and oftentimes gain some cool, unique cards that you can use for the rest of whatever campaign you're playing. That was Barkham Horror for the Arkham Horror Living Card Game, designed by Matthew Newman and designed by Fantasy Flight Games. On to the feature game of the week. This is Obsession, designed by Dan Halligan and published by Kayenta Games. Obsession is a bit of a weird one. It's a tableau building game that doesn't really play like other tableau building games. It's got a very unique theme, and it incorporates it into the mechanics famously. And it's got some really fantastic flavor too. Essentially, the theme is you are members of the English upper class in Victoria era England, and you are trying to increase the favor of your family while courting members of a new, rich, high upstanding family that's recently moved to Derbyshire, however you want to say it. Now, if that theme immediately grabs you, as I'm sure for many people it would, that's great. If it does not immediately grab you, that's okay, because there's actually a really solid game behind it with gameplay that complements the theme and integrates with it nicely. One thing I find fascinating about Obsession, it's not a horribly complex game. In fact, rules-wise, it's really very straightforward. But it took me at least 3 plays to start to really understand what I was supposed to be doing. Now, I consider myself a pretty savvy gamer, but to put this in context, Halfway through my first play of the new Vita Lasarda game on Mars, I understood better what I was doing in that game than I did for my first 3 plays of Obsession. Or better put, it took me 3 plays of Obsession to be as comfortable with the system as I was playing half a game of On Mars. Now, don't let that scare you off. There's a couple of reasons for this, and the system may be partially constructed that way to help ease players into playing the game. The big thing that causes a slower learning curve when playing Obsession is not knowing what all the tiles do. Now, this is a tableau builder, like I said, so you'll be purchasing tiles that increase the size of your tableau and increase your options throughout the game. There's a nice size bag that the tiles come in, which is a bit deceptive. It makes it look like there are more tiles than there actually are. And really, what's more important is differentiating what types of abilities tend to be printed on which types of tiles. The problem is you have to play a few games to really start to pin down that information very effectively. This isn't a game of huge resources, at least not for your first few plays. In fact, your first few plays of Obsession, you're going to feel absurdly poor. Like you can't do anything and you're just kind of barely squeaking by. And when that's the case, you can be picking up tiles, but you're not going to be filling out your tableau all that much. So you're not going to be able to explore too many options in your first couple plays. The more you play, though, the more you're going to recognize the system, the more you're going to be able to explore different tiles, and you'll be easier to start noticing which tiles are associated with which actions. The sporting tiles, for example, make you money. Essential tiles do something. I can't remember which ones do which off the top of my head. But some tiles earn you money. Some tiles earn you new guests that you can add to your hand. Some tiles just allow you to play tons of guests for tons of benefits. Some give your servants special powers. It's not until you've had the chance to really explore the tiles more that you'll start to recognize, I see. So if I'm going down a strategy where I want to have tons of tiles and I need lots of money, I should be buying lots of this specific type. That's something you can't really pick up in your first couple games because you're not usually buying as many tiles and you're already trying to grapple with enough systems and keep an eye on enough things that you can't pay enough attention to what's on the tableau in front of you. And it doesn't help that for the basic short game that you're supposed to play when you're learning, you don't really take that many actions. But as I said, as you get a bit more experience with the game, you'll start to figure out all the little tricks. And once you have an idea of what tiles are potentially available and what they're going to do, the game starts to really click and it becomes a really engrossing experience. And one that's got a fine bit of nuance too. And that nuance is really interesting to find, especially in this kind of a game where the rules are so straightforward. It's nice to discover different strategies and different ways to score points. For example, in one game, I looked around and noticed that I was way far behind in a couple of improvement tile types. These are the tiles that you purchase for your tableau. And we were halfway through the game, and I knew I was never going to catch up in that scoring area. But I noticed that a couple of the cards I had in my hand, and one of the tiles that I was able to buy, allowed me to pick up the prestige guests much more easily. So I shifted my strategy halfway through and just started picking up those prestige guests as quick as I could. And I went from being way in last place to actually being in contention for first place. I don't remember if I won that game or not, but what I do remember is how the game allowed me to pivot, change my strategy, and still be competitive. And those are the kind of nuances this game provides. But paths to victory aside, this game really shines from its action selection. One of the really cool elements of this game is that when you buy a room, because these improvement tiles that fill your tableau are called rooms, thematically, you are adding extensions to your house, and then you are inviting guests, which are the cards in your hand, to come participate in an activity in your new room or whatever room you want for rewards, money or prestige or things like that. So thematically, it's actually very relevant what you're doing turn by turn, taking actions in these rooms. But on top of that, once you take an action in a room, you flip it over, and that changes the reward that you'll get from that room from now on. Sometimes it makes the room more lucrative. Sometimes it actually makes the rewards you get for taking an action there less lucrative. But in most cases, that room will now score you more points than it would otherwise. I really like this element because you have to plan ahead, not just in what tiles you're going to be purchasing, but when you're going to be activating those tiles, or if you're going to be activating those tiles, or whether you really want to get that action on the back of a tile instead of the action on the front of the tile. The guest mechanic plays perfectly into that as well. You've got your hand of cards that have your family members on them, and then any family friends or any guests that you've been able to accumulate. Basically, acquaintances your family has. Each of those guests have certain rewards on them for allowing them to come to an event at your estate. They also, many of them require servants to attend them. And so you have to balance the servants you've got access to. And so every turn becomes this wonderfully just crunchy enough situation where you're looking at the tableau in front of you. You're trying to decide what resource you need the most of right now and which room is going to give you the most of it. Which guests you're going to play that are going to give you the resources you need now while setting yourself up for your next turn. But also being mindful of the fact that you only have so many servants, and the guests that you will still have in your hand are going to need some of those servants to do an event for the next turn. Because those servants refresh, but they can take a couple turns to do so. It adds a wonderful element of strategy to the game, and it creates more space for decision making than just picking an action or picking a tile and activating whatever the tile does. That's something that I really liked about the game. One thing that particularly makes Obsession stand out from other tableau builders is it's not an engine building game like so many of them are. Games like 51st State, Gizmos, Terraforming Mars, even Race for the Galaxy a little bit, are essentially engine builders that are also tableau builders. They're games where often the most effective way to play and to win is to create an engine through your tableau that combos off of itself to generate resources, score points, whatever it is you need to do. But not Obsession. Each room functions entirely independently from the others, and there's really no way for them to interact with each other, or really with your action in and of itself, aside from selecting a room to take an action. Now, if somebody had told me this before starting to play the game, I probably would have been turned off immediately, because it sounds kind of like a very stale experience, but that hasn't been the case at all. It's a game that allows you to be flexible in your strategy or follow a direct path to score as many points as possible and isn't really reliant on trying to get an effective engine going in order to win or be successful. Realistically, I don't think I have any real negatives for Obsession. A minor quibble I have is I don't really care for the art on any of the cards. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure all the art on the cards are actual pictures of people from the Victorian era. But it looks, I don't know. I don't really like the look of it. I wish they had been portraits. I would have preferred that instead of old photographs. And I don't really like the graphic design on the improvement tiles. It's very functional, but not very nice. It reminds me a lot of a GMT game or a Splotter game, I guess. I know some people love the graphic design on a Splotter game. I don't necessarily love it, but I don't care for it either. Again, it's functional, it does what it needs to do, but it's not really very appealing to the eye for most games. But again, these are minor quibbles that really aren't that big of a deal. I suppose one negative would be that despite this being a very straightforward game, the rulebook comes in two parts. One that's the rulebook that teaches you how to play, and then there's a reference book that clarifies interactions and rules. But this isn't a game that really feels like it needs a book that clarifies interactions and rules. Most of it's very straightforward, and because it's everything is split up between two books, when you do have a rule, the game can grind to a halt because you have to check both books and try to figure out which book the rule would be in. Not a big fan. I wish the rule books had been pared down and combined. It would have made for a more pleasant learning and playing experience. And I guess the setup rules aren't very clear as well. We've had our first couple of games we played, we were setting the game up all wrong because the setup rules weren't very clear. But again, minor quibbles for what is otherwise a really great game. The only reason I could think of that somebody might not like this game is because they are not interested in the theme. This is the kind of theme that's going to immediately appeal to some people. A bunch of other people are going to be indifferent about it, and then there's going to be a few others that just actively are mad about it. But then again, people will be actively mad about anything these days, regardless of what it is. If you are in the market for a game that makes you think of a Jane Austen novel, then this is the game for you. If you're looking for a fun, interactive experience that allows you to role play as snooty, high class, Victorian era rich people, this is a game for you. If you're looking for just an interesting tableau builder that allows you tons of options and maneuverability and strategy, this is also a game for you. This is not a game for grandma. This is not a game for your folks that only like to play sevens. What is sevens? I don't know. My family plays sevens, and they don't know what the actual name of the game is, so they call it sevens. So it's not the actual sevens you can look up on the internet, I've checked. That's besides the point. The point is that this is a gamer's game. This is a medium weight game, easy. I don't think it pushes into medium heavy, but medium for sure. Don't pull this out to play with your friend that just picked up Catan for the first time until they've kind of had a chance to get their feet wet a little bit more. That aside, though, anybody adept or just familiar with medium weight games will pick this game up quick. It's great fun. I look forward to playing it some more. I look forward to getting some of the expansions. I haven't had a chance to play any of them yet. I'm pretty sure one's just a 5th player expansion. I don't know if it adds anything else. And then there's the upstairs downstairs expansion, which adds a bunch of new servants to the game. And those are things I'd like to pick up in the future and play more of the game. I think that wraps it up. That was Obsession, designed by Dan Halligan and published by Kayenta Games. Well, that is all I have to talk about this week. Thank you for listening to Learn Your Own Rules, the podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Krim. It is Friday. We don't know election results, so stop watching your TV and stressing about it. Instead, turn off the tube, pull out a board game, and spend your weekend doing what you really want to be doing, which is playing games. Once again, thank you for listening. If you'd like to get in touch with me, you can reach me at learnyourownrules@gmail.com or tweet me at LYORules. And with that, I'll let you go. As we say, game on. Thank you for listening to the Learn Your Own Rules podcast. This podcast is created, produced, directed, and edited by Ryan Krim. Please send help.